Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday. It is February. It is Monday, February 1st, 2021. Time for a new month, anyway, if not an entirely new show. I don't know. Maybe we could rerun part of the show and take a nap during it. It's great. We're having boring weekends. It's fantastic. By which I mean, of course, we're not overly alarmed by the fact that we're about to start at the beginning of next week an impeachment trial for a now former president who, did everything he could to overthrow the United States government and apparently has no plans to contest any of it or any of those charges when his impeachment trial begins. I guess the biggest story, or continuing Trump story anyway, if you're looking around for one, that developed over the weekend. What are we up to now? 5 lawyers? I don't know how many he originally put on his team, but the president is supposed to be the former president. I think, thankfully, we can now call him that. But Trump has, I guess, supposed to have been spending his time putting together a legal defense team. His trial, the proper part that we understand as a trial, begins next Tuesday on February 9th. And the time between then and now, really then and earlier last week when the charges were read and the papers delivered, etc., and the orders adopted in the Senate setting the order of trial, that time was supposed to have been spent on his side preparing, arguments to present at the trial. And apparently that's not what they've been doing, or at least those lawyers who had spent their time doing that recently found out in meetings with Trump that he wasn't going to allow them, as his attorneys, to present the sort of case that they thought they ought to be presenting, i.e. that he is not guilty of the charges of inciting this insurrection on January 6th, but rather should spend their time arguing in favor of his theory of how the election was stolen from him, and I guess all the conspiracy theories that go along with it, and failing to come to an agreement about this, one way or another. Either those lawyers were fired or resigned. I think it sounds like most of them want the story out, certainly, that they resigned, and I believe them at this point. So I think we're up to 5 lawyers who had somehow, for some reason, agreed to actually defend this idiot in his impeachment trial and have since walked away. And some of them have been replaced, but generally speaking, the headlines from the weekend, and I guess still from this morning, are about this enormous gap that he has in his representation. Now, we're reminded by other Senate procedure gurus of sorts that as a former president, we still apparently recognize him as a former president of the United States. We'll see if we can do anything about that. He retains, by the standing rules of the Senate, floor privileges in the Senate, and so he would be able to, I don't know whether, I guess if you were impeaching someone under normal orders of the Senate and they were somehow generally considered to be mentally with it and capable of making the sort of decision that they wanted to represent themselves, I imagine that the Senate might, if presented with a serious proposal on the subject, draft orders permitting it. But no special orders, I don't think, would be necessary in this case. Former presidents retain floor privileges in the Senate and in the House of Representatives as well. Because just generally speaking, presidents and former presidents, by and large, considered to be sane, sober types who, though they may have no personal interest in exercising any of those floor access rights, were afforded them nonetheless. And so I gather that the people who think about such things, and this is one I really haven't given much thought to, but people who think about such things have come to the conclusion that it would be perfectly within the rules of the Senate, and I guess the impeachment rules that obtain during a impeachment trial would permit Trump to represent himself. Also, some rumors circulating, I guess both this time and last time that Donald Trump was impeached, that he had to be talked out of making a case for himself both on the House floor during the impeachment debate, the impeachment vote itself, and during his Senate trials. This could be, I don't know. I don't know whether I would consider it at this point to be highly entertaining or what. I'm probably more annoying than anything else, given the fact that, I mean, at bottom, what the real problem that this lays bare is that Trump appears to be planning to mount no defense whatsoever to the charges against him, but still, I think, rightly, expects to be acquitted nonetheless. In a court, a court of law, if you just simply don't defend yourself against the charges and the prosecution does a credible job of making the case against you, it's just not really an option that's available to you. You're sunk. You could plead guilty and look for a plea deal, but otherwise, if you just it's a thing that people can do. If you really believe that there's no legal basis for the charges being brought against you, you can mount no defense, demur to the charges, as they say, and as a pure matter of law, expect the judge either to rule that the jury cannot find you guilty, that given that the elements of the crime haven't been proven or something like that. But absent an equally incompetent prosecution, usually the instructions, if any, given at all to a jury would be, you're really kind of stuck with this one. Legally and logically speaking, there's nothing you can do for this guy. But in an impeachment trial, the jurors get to be witnesses, they get to be partisan, they get to take an oath to say that they're not going to be, but go ahead and be that anyway. And to date, I have never seen anybody argue that there's very much that anybody can do about that. But then again, we've never been in quite this situation before. And maybe there's something buried somewhere, and everybody should go read The Federalist or something. All right. Greg Dworkin is here. He's been reading the newspapers. These are much more recent, although many of the Federalist papers originally published in the newspapers. Read your newspapers, ladies and gentlemen. It's an excellent idea. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Read your local paper. So
Yes.
It's 25 degrees here. We got about an inch and a half of snow and another foot to come. I don't know what's going on at your end.
But
we have power and, Abbey has treats.
Great.
And most importantly, we have coffee. So we're all set.
Pretty good. That's better than I expected, but maybe later in the day it'll be tougher. But
Well, it's
good.
going to
Glad
snow
it's
till
good in the
tomorrow morning. So there's a ton to come.
all right.
So I spent a few minutes before the show looking up pro se, to what it means. I'm not a lawyer, of course, so I don't understand any of this stuff and how to pronounce it. But that means for himself, and that's a party to a lawsuit who represents himself acting in propria persona. And so the problem here is that whereas the Democrats would like to prosecute a case against Trump, Trump would like to use the whole thing to be a circus and to promulgate the big lie. And if everybody's watching him, he gets to say, no, the big lie is true, and so all my followers should completely continue to follow me. And that's, in a nutshell, what the problem is here. Now, the Democrats have two opportunities. How well they, match the moment remains to be seen, of course.
Oh, yes.
But they do have a opportunity to prosecute the case, as the New York Times is doing, with their story from yesterday, 77 days, Trump's campaign to subvert the election, which is a very good piece. And if you don't have time to read it, there's a summary, key takeaways from Trump's effort to overturn the election, which give you an idea what's going on. We'll get into that in a moment. But that's what they'll do. And at the same time, they'll try to pin the Republicans into either defending the big lie or doing something that is completely different than what the trial is supposed to be, because the evidence about Trump trying to overthrow the government with a coup is there. and how the Republicans are going to approach this. You know, their original thing was, well, you can't do this because it's not constitutional. That got voted down, even though most Republicans voted for it. So what now? It's already been decided it is. So what are you going to do now? And we don't know.
Right.
You know, it's the same argument we're having on Twitter. Well, you can't impeach somebody who's already out of office. Well, you can, because he was impeached while he was in office. And besides, the House can do what the House says it does, and the Senate can do what the Senate says it does, if you have the votes. And that's the bottom line. So shut up. That's my non-lawyer approach to this arguing about whether they can or they can't.
I think that encapsulates it nicely.
So, you know, so what do they do? Now, Punch Bowl, that's the new newsletter that occurred when Jake Sherman and some others left Politico, you know, just like Q got formed when people left Gallup. These things happen all the time.
Oh, that Q. All right.
Republicans in the Senate, they say, voted en masse that the impeachment of Trump was unconstitutional. Some have suggested going to court to halt the proceedings, but Trump fired his entire impeachment legal team because they wouldn't argue the election was stolen. Senate Republicans won't vote to convict him. They made that clear. But now they'll be forced to defend him as he argues that he won an election he lost during a trial. He absolutely doesn't, you know, during a trial it has absolutely nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah. And a lot of them admitted that he lost.
Right? I mean, but the trial is really not about whether or not he won the election. He's trying to make it that.
Yes. It would be interesting. I mean, there's no way to do it. This is one of those things, like I said, with a jury that's a little bit more under the control of the court, you can say, well, for one thing, if you all believe that he lost the election and he's making an argument that he won the election, you don't have to vote to acquit him. But more to the point, in a court, they would say, see, the charges were about this insurrection, and he didn't say anything about that, so you're not allowed to accept any of his arguments as bearing on this case. So 100% of the preponderance of the evidence is on the side of the prosecution. Go to it.
Right. So the philosophical underpinnings of this entire procedure here are actually summed up by Margaret Sullivan, the media critic,
really,
in the Washington Post.
Thank God she's there.
With her headline, "So you're being held accountable?" That's not cancel culture.
Oh, really? Thank you. All right, that's good. Glad we finally got around to that one.
Right?
Yeah. You suck. That's just that's just the way it is. Sorry, I didn't mean to cancel you. I mean, continue on by all means, but
there's been plenty of criticism about decisions she's written. She's writing about Politico not being happy with Ben Shapiro doing a newsletter there. That's what happened after the Punch Bowl people left.
Oh, yeah.
It's been plenty of criticism about these decisions, and not one of which had anything to do with the First Amendment, which forbids the government, Twitter or any other private entity, from shutting down speech except in the most dangerous cases. But you never know it from all the bad faith squealing, mostly from the right. Night after night, Fox News offers primetime viewers its leftist assault on speech show. Josh Hawley, who needed only a few days to find a new publisher for his book, subsequently blasted the muzzling of America in an opinion piece in the widely read New York Post. And then, of course, he's on Fox News every night talking about the fact that he's muzzled.
Yes.
You know, have any of these people been silenced? Hardly.
Still working.
And then there's Representative Matt Gaetz, who ranted that the congressional efforts to hold Trump accountable for his role in the attempted insurrection of the Capitol are somehow sins against free expression. But I talked with a leading First Amendment lawyer and scholar, Jamil Jaffer, about all of this last week. Jaffer thinks a lot of these complaints are misguided. They spring from a misunderstanding. Margaret Sullivan would call it an intentional misunderstanding.
You are right.
Of what the First Amendment is about. The point of the First Amendment is to take those kind of debates out of the hands of the government, put them in the hands of private citizens. It's not subverting the First Amendment, therefore, to criticize a politician or a cable news host or a right-wing provocateur. That's the whole point.
That's an exercise of the First Amendment. Mine.
Yeah,
to yell at you.
So don't mix them up.
Okay.
Do these politicians run the risk of being canceled? I doubt it. They'll find a way to get their messages out, just as Hawley's doing with such success. So it would help if journalists pushed back more effectively. CNN's Pamela Brown gave a masterclass in her devastating interview with Madison Cawthorn. By the end, he had no defense left for his election denialism. But even if that sort of pushback becomes the norm, And we know it doesn't. I mean, Dana Bash already blocked me on Twitter for saying that you've done he became presidential once too often. So she has incredible thin skin and doesn't know how to push back. And we've discussed ad nauseum the Chuck Todd problem. But even if that sort of pushback becomes a norm, news organizations should be wary of handling the charlatans a megaphone. You can call that cancel culture if you want. I call it responsibility. The good news is in America, we get to argue about it. And that's all true. So really the argument about the impeachment, since Republicans have already decided to acquit, is whether or not you hand Trump another megaphone. And if you don't know that that's the argument, you will when the trial starts.
Yes.
I mean, we saw that originally, I think, in the original impeachment of Trump, where people tuned in thinking they were going to hear some erudite arguments on the part of the Democrats, which they heard, Adam Schiff and his summaries and such. But for 90% of the time, in fact, we're treated to Jim Jordan taking his coat up and jumping on the desk talking about nonsense.
Yeah. Well,
and so if you're going to make it a circus, and those people have the ability to make it a circus, then it's going to be, a circus. It's not going to be what you think. And that's my biggest fear about what comes next here.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it goes. Not certain how I feel about it. Like, again, ordinarily at this point, I'd be saying, well, it might be interesting to see with a good judge on the bench when a defendant who's, universally recognized as a carnival barker attempts to turn a trial into a circus, the judge comes down on him, and it begins to hurt. They begin to feel it because the judge, keeps telling him to sit down or shackles him to a chair or gags him or whatever it is. Pat Leahy, not that kind of person ordinarily, but it is interesting that.
But Donald Trump also doesn't feel shame, so that doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's possible too. But then, I guess if I believed that Pat Leahy were the sort of person who would resort to flexing it a little bit, I'd feel better about it. But I mean, you can clobber him with the mace. You can kick him out. You can say, I understand you're proceeding as your own defense, but you're not allowed to talk anymore. That's it. You're finished. Remember, we began this trial with be silent on pain of imprisonment. If you can't be silent when it's not your time to talk, we're going to have to talk about the imprisonment part, I guess. So we'll see. I mean, I doubt that they'll, Pat Leahy will bend over backwards to be fair to the idiot who's looking to overthrow the government. That's the only reason we're listening to Pat Leahy in the first place. But, we'll see whether, maybe he'll get cantankerous all of a sudden. We're waiting for him to become a cantankerous old man. He's been pretty even-keeled, too even-keeled. For all this time. When do we get to the grumpy old man segment of the show?
Yeah, maybe Biden will be a grumpy old man when he meets with the Republicans over the COVID relief stuff. That'll be a story we talk about in a minute. But before we do that, I did want to touch base on this New York Times piece, which I don't want to become yesterday's news. And perhaps the summary is better. Key takeaways from Trump's effort to overturn the election.
Yes.
As some lawyers on Trump's team pulled back, others were ready to press ahead with suits skating the lines of legal ethics and reason. That's important because you'll see it in the impeachment. It's exactly what happened. The lawyers who wanted to argue that this is unconstitutional got fired in favor of the lawyers who want to argue that Trump won.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
I mean, that's my point here. As some lawyers on Trump's team pulled back, others were ready to press ahead. Within 10 days of the election, even as Mr. Trump and his supporters promoted allegation after allegation of voter fraud, his team of election lawyers knew that the reality was the inverse of what Trump was presenting. They were not finding substantial evidence of malfeasance or enough irregularities to overturn the election. That reality was hammered home on November 12th, when final Arizona results showed Biden with an irreversible lead. At an Oval Office meeting that day, the election lawyers squared off against the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, over Mr. Giuliani's embrace of questionable legal tactics and conspiracy theories, like one that Dominion voting machines had transformed Trump votes into Biden votes. Ultimately, Trump decided to give Mr. Giuliani leadership of the entire legal strategy, making November 12th the day when Mr. Trump's effort to reverse his loss in the courts became an all-out, extra-legal campaign to disenfranchise millions of voters based on the false notion of pervasive fraud. Now, that big lie still continues to this day, aided and abetted by Fox, And so, again, my concern about the impeachment trial is Trump will just see it as another vehicle to do the same thing because he has no shame.
Yes.
And more importantly, because he doesn't matter, it's the Republican senators who are willing to go along with this because basically the Republican Party is the Trump Party. I mean, at this point, you could find 5 of them, maybe 6, maybe even 7, who will say, I can't do this. But you're not going to find a lot of them. You even have people like Rob Portman who will say, oh, I'm resigning. I can't deal with this anymore. And, of course, everything Trump did was awful, but, like, you can't do anything about it.
Yes.
Because, like, you can't ask me to do anything about it. You can't, I have no power. I'm not going to vote to convict him. That's ridiculous. You can't expect to hold him accountable. The point is what he did was wrong. And I just need to say that. And I'm not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize me or anybody else because I'm a coward. I mean, basically, that's Rob Portman's message. And he's supposed to be one of the moderate, reasonable ones, as if there's such a thing as a moderate and reasonable Nazi.
I learned that yesterday from the Sunday shows, or people tweeting tweeting about him anyway. Reasonable guy. That's all I heard.
But there's nothing reasonable about what he said.
Oh, well, then he's not
if he did those
That's
things,
weird.
then you have to be like Mitt Romney, right? And Mitt Romney is actually, to his credit, he's been pretty consistent about this. He's a conservative. He's a Republican. He's a partisan. We're never going to be happy with him. But when Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted that she had the support of Trump and that she spoke with him on whatever it was, Saturday morning, Romney tweeted, lies of a feather flock together, Marjorie Taylor Greene's nonsense and the big lie of a stolen election. I mean, that's consistent. He'll vote to convict. The rest of them, are fairly useless. And that's important when you move to what's going to happen with the COVID relief bill now that we're in the let's actually look at legislation to pass. Biden wants $1.9 trillion. The Republicans want a third of that. That's their offer on the table. The very fact that the filibuster is looming out there as get rid of it will pass things, or even reconciliation will pass things. And remember, reconciliation is this obscure thing that allows a up or down vote on stuff. And Republicans prefer the equally obscure legislative tactic of confrontation to pass things.
Yes.
They prefer confrontation to reconciliation every time. So that's out there, and that's forcing the Republicans to actually come up with an offer. Now, they can act miffed all they want that Biden doesn't seem to be totally receptive. Biden's playing the game, and they'll say, okay, come over to my house this afternoon at 5 o'clock, and we'll talk about it. But the fact of the matter is Democrats are getting ready to pass this thing without them. And so they can vote for it or they can not vote for it. But what they put on the table was an offer. It wasn't a serious offer. And this afternoon we'll find out whether or not they actually have a serious offer. I doubt it. And if the Republicans want to play the game of saying, okay, you have to pass this without us, Biden will say, fine, we'll pass it without you.
I mean, it's
Go ahead.
be done.
Hot lips, resign your commission.
I guess so. That's about where we'd have to land on it. I mean, they're not bringing a tremendous number of votes. They're not a big help.
Well, 10 is enough, right? That's the whole point. That was
right. If we have all 50, I mean,
why is it magic that there were 10 people that signed on?
Yes.
Why not 9? Why not 11?
That's true.
Well, because they wanted to let you know that 10 is 50 plus 10, that's 60, and so you can pass stuff. That's why they did that.
Yeah, you're supposed to bring me one more.
It's not an actual serious offer.
Oh. See, that seems to be the case. When you bring me a gang like that, you're supposed to bring me a buffer as well, like 1 or 2 extra.
It's supposed to be the Sweet 16, is the 16 people that were negotiate, but they didn't bring 16. They brought 10. Why did they bring 10? Because 50 plus 10 is 60. That's why.
Yeah, right. But
is that how you do things in the Congress, that you decide the merits of something is whether or not you have 50 plus 10? Well, that's how it's decided, but that's politics. That's not legislating. That's not, that's not Schoolhouse Rock.
No. Well, I bring it up because like back in the my own favorite old timey gang, the Gang of 14, did it in what I thought was the more efficient way was they brought a buffer. I think they only needed 12 to do this and 6 on the side in order to guarantee what the blocking what both sides wanted blocked, but they brought an extra in case you lost one along the way, which I thought was good planning. And here they've scraped together the bare minimum. If anybody in either party has any reservations whatsoever, the whole thing falls apart. You need to bring
And that's why I'm saying it wasn't really a serious offer. So Biden's doing the right thing for the show of it to meet them. But, right. Did you bring 6 other people with you?
No, I guess not. All right.
Okay, well, then we're not serious about it. We're going to go ahead and do this. Well, what about Sinema and Manchin? Everybody always sweats Sinema and Manchin. Sinema and Manchin generally vote with the Democrats when push comes to shove. And one of the things about doing this, from the Democrats' point of view, is that if this isn't a serious offer, you're giving cover for Sinema and Manchin to vote, however the Democrats need them to vote.
I guess that's
because they're willing to negotiate. This wasn't a serious negotiation. I can't put up with this. We have to have this. And both of them have said, we have to have this. This is must-pass legislation. So, give me something I can work with. This isn't something I can work with, and that's going to be how it works out.
Okay.
Oh, but, you can never trust the Democrats. Lucy in the football, they always fail. Actually, they're doing really well here. They're in strong position. They took the House. They took the Senate. They took the White House. They're playing hardball. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And Biden's doing it with a kindly Uncle Joe, smile. And what's your problem?
Yes, I don't know if there's a acceptable name I can hang on it that I won't have to bleep out afterwards. It's a good question. All right, well, we'll see. I don't know. I guess you say there's a meeting. Is it today? It's happening?
5 p.m. today.
All right, well.
You're invited over to the White House for Uncle Joe's coffee and cake, and they'll talk about it.
Yeah. You should get some of that
Susan
chocolate
Collins
cake.
Will have the gang of Collins will have a chance to be trouble,
Yeah. Find out what she likes to eat, I guess, and that
Uncle
way
Joe
you
will
can
try to
concentrate
soothe those troubled waters, and then we'll see what happens.
All right. Sure. Why not? Then he'll be criticized for soothing things or something. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on with Greg Dworkin, furiously searching around for a Far Side cartoon that we were talking about during the break. And I pointed out to him, and I guess now I'll point out to everyone on the air, that the giant splashy photo illustrating the big New York Times key takeaways from Trump's effort to overturn the election, very imposing, and I guess they photoshopped it up a little bit. What they put I guess Trump had that big screen at his rally, and they have photoshopped this sort of Big Brother close up of his puffy eyes into the thing. I don't think they actually had that image up on the screen at any point, but we all get the point. Anyway, I just found it interesting. It's mostly a photo of the crowd and the tops of the heads of the people closest to the photographer, and then a bunch of flags of various sorts, a couple of American flags, smattering of Trump 2020 flags, a couple of other things, and a few Gadsden flags in there as well. Over on the right, though, it'll make you want to pull up the photo, because over on the right, somebody's got what I guess is supposed to pass as a Gadsden flag, but is in fact one of those internet available for sale on the internet spoofs of the Gadsden flags. It's the no step on snake flag with the hand-drawn magic marker snake in the grass there. So it's quite interesting to see. I don't know whether the guy, could be a guy who was there for spoofing them. Could be that they don't understand the spoof. Could be that he didn't recognize the difference between that and the actual Gadsden flag. No idea. But whatever it is, it's I'm glad they're there representing the spoofers side of this grand internet conspiracy. It's fun and
so the way the human mind works, word association
Yes.
and all of that. That immediately raised a Gary Larson cartoon, a famous Gary Larson cartoon from the past, with Tarzan meeting Jane for the first time. And as he swings over to her, he says, "Okay, how do you do? My name is Tarzan, and I believe you are known as Jane." He's thinking to himself, "That's how I'm going to do this." And no. He's still swinging and thinking, "Let me do it this way. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, and you?" No. You must be Jane. I'm Tarzan. It's a pleasure to meet you. And, of course, he spots her, lands on the proper tree, and says, "Me Tarzan, you Jane," and then thinks to himself, "Oh, damn." And so when I saw the Gadsden flag, or the fake Gadsden flag, that's exactly what I thought of. But, of course, that Gary Larson cartoon made me think of what I saw yesterday on the internet, which is like the most famous Gary Larson cartoon of all.
Now I see it. Okay.
And that is the one where cavemen are attending a TED Talk, and the TED Talk cave person is pointing to the end of a stegosaurus and says, "Now this end is called the Thagomizer, after the late Thag Simmons." But the reason that it's so famous is the Thagomizer is actually the name for the spiked tail of a stegosaurid dinosaur. It didn't have an official name until that cartoon, and the scientific community just accepted it. And so that's what it is now.
And I'm sure in homage to the cartoon, but why not? What else are you going to call it? You could give it a Latin name, but who cares? Thagomizer. Yeah, exactly. I like it.
It's
pretty
a Thagomizer. Good. Everybody knows what it is. So, and it's a great origin story. If you're a superhero and all of that. Sure. So it's fantastic. And these things, these memes actually last forever. I mean, I just mentioned Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock is still around. Everybody kind of knows what that means, or can conjure up an image when you mention it. Yes. And, you have to turn that into, okay, well, that's my basic understanding. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is my basic understanding of a filibuster. And Schoolhouse Rock is my basic understanding of how bills pass. And so, how do we put this together and actually get stuff done so that people have COVID relief in their pocket? The story's coming out now, by the way, about what went wrong with the Trump COVID relief, or paralleling the stuff that's coming out about what went wrong with Trump accepting that he lost the election. And in this particular case, I'm referring to, I think it was in Stat News, the story about how the Trump administration was deliberately trying to make sure that the states didn't have enough money for vaccine distribution. They were actively working to make sure the states didn't have it. It's not that they didn't notice that the states needed it. They were actively working to sabotage getting money to the states so the states could vaccinate people. And that's, by the way, a bad thing. Yes. It's really
the sort of thing that makes less responsible
not what
people.
you wanted from your government. And, it's really not a good thing that in fact happened. Here is the piece from Stat News, which I will send to you. It's only fair that you have it too, because here on the radio you can't see anything.
Right. I can tell all the people what it looks like.
Right.
When I see it.
Scoop, Trump officials spent the fall actively lobbying Congress not to give states money. Health officials insisted they needed to vaccine some 300 million Americans.
Seems wrong.
To vaccinate some 300 million Americans. At that time, the Trump administration only provided states $200 million, which is way,
seems like less than
they need billions. And so, again,
states,
I look at this and say, this is like the COVID relief bill. We need $1.9 trillion.
And they send next to nothing.
And they offer like $4.57 and say, okay, well, let's compromise.
Yeah.
Right? But when you read the article, it goes on to say, well, the problem here is that the Trump officials just assumed that the state people asking for money were just lying. That they didn't really need it, that they didn't know what they were talking about, and you can't have it.
Great.
What is the basis for that? There isn't one.
Well, besides, decades of Republican lies about the way government works. But I get what you mean. And I don't mean to say that this isn't what they had also done. But yeah, they just think that states, if they had just been more thrifty and planned their budgets like you and I do around our kitchen table, everything would be fine.
If they only had to balance the budget, none of this would have happened, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they do have to balance the budget. They're states.
Yes. Right, that's true too. They do have that problem. They can't
Much of the lobbying push came from Paul Mango, the former deputy chief of staff for policy at the Department of Health and Human Services. He argued repeatedly that states hadn't demonstrated they needed the funding. Because as of last October, they hadn't spent the $200 million that the Center for Disease Control sent to them. Well, they didn't send it because they didn't spend it for several reasons. Right?
Yeah.
They didn't spend it because they didn't have the vaccine.
That's one reason, yes.
Right?
Right.
They didn't spend it because they weren't sure what other monies were coming and what sort of a program they could set up. You can't hire people and then just run out of money and now you have to fire them 2 weeks later. They were using their own money from known sources to fund this first because they thought that was thrifty.
Yes.
Right? Well, state health departments, for their part, say there's several other good reasons why. They hadn't begun vaccinating. States were drawing down other sources of funding that were set to expire. They were reluctant to immediately spend the new funding because they were unsure where new funding would be coming from. True. And so they didn't immediately do this. So the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, ASTO, A-S-T-H-O, they are part of the good guys with the white hats.
As though.
Said that the metric, it wasn't a real-time metric, and you can't really report what the feds were asking to be shown about how you spend the money for weeks to months, but they needed it now.
Yes.
Okay, and then Mango made a similar argument. He's arguing from HHS about CDC. At that time, Trump's CDC director, Robert Redfield, was requesting $6 billion for states' efforts, and Mango said the money Redfield requested wasn't needed. How do you know it's not needed? Because I said so.
I'm the Mango. Right.
Here's the quote. I call it the Mutual Admiration Society. They were trying to help their friends at the state public health offices even though they didn't have any real plan to spend the money. So I'm not giving it to them.
Aha. All right, Guy. We'll just figure out what's up with this. And it's, yes,
Mango wasn't the only one using the argument. Russ Vaught, the head of the White House Budget Office, likewise argued that states didn't need additional funding because they hadn't spent the money allocated to them, a Republican Senate aide said. The Republican aide called Vaught obsessed with the fact that states hadn't spent the money. The Republican aide also emphasized that even staunch fiscal conservatives knew the states needed more than $200 million to vaccinate the majority of Americans. Trump staffers were so reluctant to acknowledge that states needed funding that staffers negotiating the relief packages gave up on asking the Trump administration how much money states needed. Instead, they went directly to associations representing state and local health departments, and the lobbying from the Trump administration prompted a flurry of defensive action from state health officials. So they have the receipts here in a sharply worded letter on December 4th. ASTO and the Association of Immunization Managers wrote to, did you know there was such a thing?
No.
Wrote to Surgeon General Jerome Adams that recent communications by senior administration officials to Congress indicate this administration does not support our request for substantial additional resources. This is extremely unfortunate. We believe it's neither a partisan nor political statement to share the very obvious fact that the vaccination of 330 million people safely and effectively will take more than $340 million.
Yeah, and that's adding the existing pools together. I was going to say, if you want to vaccinate 300 million, you can't spend $200 million to do it.
Yeah, it's $1 per person.
Yeah, I mean, come on. It's never gonna. You're never gonna get it done at $1 a person. But I mean, what a terrible idea! This is how many people there are. Do you know how many people there are in the United States? Mango.
Well, they don't.
At any point.
Yeah. The National Governors Association had also directly warned the Trump administration that additional funding was needed. Without additional state and local funding, we will be hampered in what we can accomplish. When can we expect more definitive information? This is on October 18th. In HHS response, the agency reiterated $200 million has already been allocated, and the state should recognize that most of the major costs are already being covered. And so eventually the states won that argument, and Congress allocated an extra $4.5 billion.
That seems like more.
Which puts the $200 million claim, in perspective. Even Republicans voted for that.
All right. I mean, it's funny. It's the sort of argument that leads to states like throwing up their hands and saying, I don't know, for whatever reason, the regulation says we have to spend what we were given already or else we won't get more, which is not an unfamiliar budgetary rule for, smaller operations, say, than this.
Yeah, which it sounds smart and sometimes isn't, but go ahead.
But it's the sort of thing that then leads to, a government organization doing something completely absurd with the $200 million, or reallocating it, or sending it to something that really didn't need to be done just to clear the deck so that more money could come in, and then somebody coming in after the fact and saying, well, now we're not going to give you more money because you bought, 4 hammers with the $200 million that we gave you. I didn't want them. I mean, we could use hammers, but you were like, you got to spend this money if you want the rest of it. We didn't know what to do with it, so we spent it. Now, where's the money? You spent the $200 million so poorly, we're not going to send you the rest. Your rule to begin with was the stupid part. I can't pay for, what am I supposed to do with $200 million? We'll buy a half a needle for everybody. How do I even get that? Well, the first $100 million went to saws to cut the needles in half. After that, it was just a waste of time, don't you think? So.
Well, I don't want to, give you any ideas or anything like that. But I'm just saying, if you happen to spend that $200 million in hiring Jared's friend here,
right? Oh,
maybe we could come to some sort of agreement.
Yes, that's true. That might.
I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but we'll grease the wheels a little bit. You know what I'm saying here?
Yeesh. Wow. All right. Well,
that's how we did ventilators. It worked out fine.
Oh yes, there's going to be an investigation into that. I've found out already. There's already a committee getting ready to look into it, which is good.
So there's plenty of material here if you're really interested.
Plus, the guy's name is Mango.
Seeing how things went. Now, let me turn, just because we don't have that much more time, into this wonderful chart that Ashish Jha, the Dean of the Brown School of Public Health, put together about our vaccines and which ones you should pick. He said, I'm often asked about the different vaccines and their efficacy. Each trial reports efficacy differently. And currently we have preliminary results only for Novavax and J&J, Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, yes,
but what numbers matter? What should you look for? Here's one set of data to track in a simple table. And the first column is vaccine trials. Moderna, Pfizer, Novavax, AstraZeneca, J&J.
Right, got them.
And the second column is approximate number of people who actually received the vaccine in these trials. Moderna had 15,000. That's a lot of people. Pfizer had 18,600.
That's nice.
When you poll a state, sometimes you only do 400 people,
Yeah.
Novavax, 13,000. AstraZeneca, 5,800. J&J, 22,000 people.
Yes.
So there were a lot of people who went into these trials. And looking at the people within the trial, the third column matches this number to each one of the companies, each one of the vaccines. The number of hospitalized for COVID.
Yeah.
From Moderna, 0. Pfizer, 0. Novavax, 0. AstraZeneca, 0. J&J, 0.
So far,
the number of people who died from COVID, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 0. And the number of people who died from the vaccine, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 0. So which vaccine should you pick? You should pick the one that has the zeros.
Yeah, I guess so. Let me see.
Any of them. The one that goes in your arm is the best vaccine to have. If that's available, take it.
Yes, right. Now, how many of them have I gotten? 0. But the point is,
same with
when
me,
I get it.
But Connecticut, it's February.
Yeah.
And Connecticut should be opening up over 65 soon enough.
Okay.
It's a supply problem. And that's where Biden is being pressured a little bit to do the Defense Production Act and, use the companies that aren't making vaccine to make vaccine. There are companies that tried to make vaccine and it didn't go well, but they have all the resources because they were doing their own and it didn't work. So activate them.
Okay. Well,
I don't know, but you should be asking.
Guess so. Well, I like the zeros. We can go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a safe and effective vaccine is the point.
It certainly appears to be.
You want to be hesitant about it? Well, be hesitant about going into the hospital or dying. because this vaccine prevents those things.
That.
Does it prevent you from actually getting infected? We don't know that yet. J&J data may help with that because they're doing serial blood tests, but that's going to take a while. Even if it doesn't exactly prevent the infection, if it prevents sequelae and consequences from the infection, that's, as Joe Biden might say, a BFD.
Yeah, right. That's the part you don't want. The getting it is bad. Don't want it. Rather not have it. Save it for someone else who would rather have it, I guess. And but yeah, the hospitalization and death part, definitely want to avoid those. And I don't know, that's a lot of zeros. So far so good.
Right. So what about all the variants you hear about? There's at least three. There's the UK one. There's the Brazilian one. There's a South African one.
Those I know.
There's there might even be a Los Angeles one. But what does all of that mean in regard to the vaccines? Just about nothing at this particular point in time. They tend to work for the worst sequelae, even with the variants. And it may be that, especially with J&J, but with some of the others, that down the road you might need a booster. Well, we do that.
Okay.
People get pertussis boosters, whooping cough boosters.
Well, sure.
It happens, every
couple of years,
But for now, it doesn't really change anything in the grand scheme, in the big picture, in the BFD part of it. So, follow them. It's important to follow them. We have to be aware, especially because those variants are more infectious. And that means that even though cases are dropping now, and why are they dropping? Because remember when all those experts and their brother-in-laws indeed said, hey, if everybody travels and ignores our recommendations, we're going to have this big spike of cases.
Yes.
Everybody traveled and ignored our recommendations, and we had this big spike of cases.
Yeah.
And so now that's dropping down. And so we're getting back to what the baseline was before. That's a wonderful thing. With these variants and increased infectivity, things may go up again. But at the same time, we are actually starting to vaccinate people. And so those things may balance, and we'll have to see what happens. But for now, the presence of variants doesn't really change the plan. Get yourself vaccinated when you can. There's going to be a lot of impetus to do it in an orderly fashion, just like when Obamacare first came out and the exchanges weren't working, and then they were, and then it became a lot easier to work with them. Yeah. Andy Slavitt, the same guy who was in charge of fixing that, is in charge of trying to fix the vaccine rollout. And it's a supply problem right now, a production problem right now. But when things become available, hopefully more Americans will avail themselves of getting those vaccines. And so less people will die. That's the plan. And, it sounds like a good plan to me.
Yeah,
now, if you need money for that, you can't vaccinate people with $200 million. So now you get back to this whole thing about the COVID-19 plan. The Biden folks want $1.9 trillion. They say that's what they need. Republicans say, I get the concept. You finally convinced me that we have to do something. Let me give you a third of what you asked for, because in general, whatever you ask for, we're going to turn it down, because that way we're proving that you need to be efficient. It's just smart management. And the Biden people are saying, well, people are dying and nobody believes you. So if you don't do it, we're going to do it ourselves.
Oh.
And the Republicans, well, I don't know what they're going to say. We're going to find out this afternoon.
I guess so. We'll have to wait until they come out and have their press conference, but they missed the 6 o'clock news. So going for the 11, I guess. So if that's still a thing that people do, because now, 24/7, I suppose. Someone will tweet the news out whenever they come out. We don't have to wait for videotape at 11. So that's the big improvement so far. Okay.
Right. And again, the last thing I will remind everybody as they're watching this reality show play out, there was no such thing as bipartisan. In fact, there's often no such. There wasn't during the Bush administration, W. There wasn't during the Trump administration. Bipartisanship is only a thing with Democratic administrations. So as soon as the Democrats come in power, all of a sudden balancing the budget matters and everybody has to be bipartisan. But when the Republicans are in power, spend as much as you want on tax cuts for the rich, and we can do it, so we're going to, is the only bipartisan thing you need to know, bud.
Yeah, that's the way they operate typically. Yes, and but for those wondering, I've noticed that Mr. Responsible Moderate Rob Portman, of course, spent the weekend pointing out that, well, if the Democrats use reconciliation as the vehicle to pass their COVID relief bill, that's going to poison the well of bipartisanship.
Yes,
here,
it's
and we're
different
not gonna
when
be
we
able to
did
do
it.
anything. Yeah, right. I did check, and I like to read the rules and the precedents. I looked all weekend. I couldn't find anything that said that Republicans aren't allowed to vote for reconciliation bills. I mean, if you use reconciliation, it can still be a bipartisan vote. If you want to vote for it, vote for it. And then if Republicans join in, and if they get 61 votes for a reconciliation bill, you might say, well, you didn't need to use reconciliation for it, but still passes, and you're still Republicans. It works just fine. Try it out. You'll see. There's nothing wrong with, I mean, honestly, it is a really ridiculous thing to say, and reveals, I think, probably too much, more than he thought he was revealing, which is that, there are actually, all Republicans will make their policy decision based on not only procedural issues, but am I going to have the SADs because you didn't need me to pass this? I was here, I helped, but you didn't need me, so I'm now against the policy. Really? In the middle of this pandemic, coming up on 500,000 people dead, and you retiring and not facing the voters again for the rest of your life, by the way, you could not find it within your heart somewhere to simply say, I actually approve of this policy of trying to bring the pandemic to end, and I'm going to not, have my wounded pride get in the way of things.
Well, here's the thing. It's easy to be cynical, and people who are overly cynical about politics, I wrote this over the weekend.
No one is.
Are usually right, but you also miss when things are changing. And so all of a sudden, the savvy thing to do is to count the votes. 50 plus 1 is all that matters, yada, yada, yada. All of a sudden becomes, boy, this was really stupid politically to not back something that's incredibly popular.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's still hanging out there. I guess he doesn't want it to be, well, yeah, we know he doesn't want the COVID relief package to be as large as it needs to be. But why, I don't know. The interviewers aren't skilled enough.
Why would you not want a package to be as large as it needs to be? I mean, this fits with my theory that Republicans' biggest fear isn't the budget, it's that something a Democrat proposes will actually work and become popular, and then it will be associated with Democrats.
Right.
Like the New Deal.
I mean, I think that's what underlies the whole thing. It could be, there could be room for an honest broker to say, I just don't believe that this much is needed, but it is odd, especially as I see Steve Dennis pointing out, for instance, that the
Steve
Republicans...
Dennis, excellent congressional reporter.
Pointing out, I guess as he's looking at the report of what this group of 10 Republicans is proposing, and his observation, Steve's, is if you add the $350 billion that Biden wanted for state and local aid to this, then you'd be just under $1 trillion, which is sometimes where these people can come down. And they love to fall short of a line. That's really why 1.9 trillion was the proposal to begin with. Even Democrats love to fall just under a line. Everyone understands price points. But
the other side of that argument, do you remember the discussion we just had about HHS claiming that the states didn't deserve more money because they didn't spend the money we already gave them?
Yes.
Part of the discussion on the Republican side is, why are you asking us for more money? You haven't spent the money we've already given you.
Yeah.
There's always reasons for that. There are always reasons for that. That is an excuse. That's not a philosophical point.
Right. True. Because there is very often an answer, and a very reasonable one if you'll sit through it, if you have the patience to sit through it instead of just being cynical about things. Why didn't you spend the money we gave you? Well, there's a terrific reason, and if you heard it, you'd probably be compelled to give us the rest of the money. Well, then by no means should you be allowed to tell me.
And don't tell me.
Yeah.
If it's so goddamn reasonable, don't tell me what
right. Please don't. Steve Dennis, the other point he makes here is, so if you added the state and local aid that Biden's talking about, not only would you come in under $1 trillion, but he points out here, Collins, Cassidy, and some of the others in this group at one point co-sponsored a bill calling for $500 billion in state and local aid. When it was Trump and he would absolutely not allow the thing to pass and would never sign it and would veto it, they went big. $500 billion in state aid. Biden's asking for $350 billion, $150 billion less than they co-sponsored. And now they're like, what? We never, no, by no means should you spend that sort of money.
We can't do that. That's way too much money.
Yeah, but you actually sponsored that bill before. Well, I wish you would fall on your head and forget that. Okay, well,
that's why I look at it and say, come on, this isn't serious negotiating, and this is not a good faith effort. Yeah. And that's why Biden is playing the public relations game, the PR game, is saying, okay, come over to my house for cookies and milk, and we'll talk about it. But you're not going to derail what we have in mind.
All right. Well, we'll find out what they have to say and
Biden,
watch the press.
If he's a real bipartisan guy, will say we're going to pass what we want to anyway, but I'll thank you for giving us some suggestions.
Yes. Okay. Right. And also, I don't like these cookies, and I'm glad you came to eat them up because I don't want them to go stale.
Right. They're last year's cookies. But that's okay. That's not the point. Yeah. The point is I offered them to you.
Right. You don't have to take them.
Except for you, Portman. You didn't finish last year's cookies, so I'm not giving you any this year.
Now, that would be something. Invite them over for dinner and then just don't serve them anything and say, there's a half a sandwich in your fridge. You'll get your dinner when that's finished.
As long as you got food in your fridge,
you don't need
this. No way you're getting food from me. You got to go eat everything in your fridge before I will serve you dinner.
Finish what's on your plate.
That's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, it's good Republican politics. Well, if you plan your budget around a kitchen table, eventually you're going to have to, I guess, eventually one of your founding principles is going to be finish what's on your plate. But that's why we don't do it this way. All right. Wow.
Finish what's in your refrigerator, even better. Now, at once.
Right, including the baking soda. Thank you very much. Yum. All right. Well, we've certainly filled the hour again. But you're not going anywhere. It's snowing, so I guess it's all right.
Yeah. So I got something that'll fit into the 8 seconds we have left.
All right.
And this is from New York Intelligencer. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the worst enemy for most causes that she supposedly supports, and the guy she ran against, the Republican John Cowan, the neurosurgeon whom Greene bested in a primary runoff, talks about her, but says there's probably 8 more hours of tapes of her being nuts.
Oh, well, yes. And people are thumbing through that a little at a time. Yeah, you want to send me that? And I'll include that in the roundup. And I got a link or two to some more video of her being nuts. That was her major avocation prior to election. All right. Thanks, Greg. We'll check in with you again on Tuesday, and I hope you'll be shoveled out by then. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, plenty more to go over here and plenty more to dive deeper into. Those of you frustrated by the tale of the Trump administration, such as it was, handling state and local aid and vaccines and mango and everything, as angry as you are about it, the ruling from the civil politics board that keeps everything on an even keel and make sure that we don't go too far. The word is you cannot hang the mango. So as much as you might want to, it's just not an option that's available to you. Stop talking about it. On the other hand, lots of people remember you're supposed to be being reasonable and everything, so you're not supposed to be out there talking about how, quite honestly, Trump deserves to hang for his mismanagement of the pandemic. But now that he's not president, you're still not supposed to, charge up to him and insist that that's what you're going to do. He has Secret Service protection for the time being. Anyway, really ought to be stripped of that as well, but not so that you can capture and hang him, but just so that he can stop charging them extra money and lining his pockets with it. That would be quite enough for me at this point. But, as I've said a number of times, people are going to wonder. The future historians are going to be astonished that Trump wasn't dragged bodily from the White House and put on trial for crimes against humanity, given what we're learning every day about what he intentionally didn't do to prevent this worldwide disaster. And the disaster continues worldwide, largely because America was absent from the fight. Not only did we contribute to propagating the virus around the world by refusing to tamp down on and continuing to travel and bring it elsewhere and spread it among everywhere in America, quite honestly. But we were just, despite the efforts on the vaccine front, absent from our usual role of helping others continue their efforts to tamp down on the virus. Really just, I don't know whether it will be viewed this way or not, but should be like the final nail in the coffin of it really doesn't matter who's president because, whether you call it the deep state or you call it, permanent bureaucracy or it's okay. It doesn't matter who's president because they'll surround themselves with people who know how to pull the right levers and make things happen. You can actually F that up badly enough that, well, in this case, like I said, we're on a race to 500,000 dying already from this. Although lots of people, I guess to no one's surprise, out there now trying to shift this onto Biden. And actually now there are Republicans keeping count of how many people have died of the pandemic and saying, what's Biden going to do? It's been 10 days. How come we haven't, in 10 days he's killed 500,000 people. It's outrageous. There really are literally people, and not being ironic about it either, just being that blind to what was going on. It's the first time that they've somehow realized that people are dying from this disease, and guess what? It's obviously the Democrats' fault. Sure. All right. Well, let's see. What do we add to Greg's roundup here? I mentioned, well, let's see. Did I mention it on here? It might have been what we were talking about during the final break, the final minute that Greg was with us. And we were talking about the number of, the one thing he snuck in before the break was the number of hours of Marjorie Taylor Greene video that's still out there to be discovered about just how crazy she really was. I mean, I guess if you're not, there's nobody that's not convinced. I can't even speak to the group that's not yet convinced that she's crazy. But for the bulk of her campaign and the few days that she's actually, been in office, she's managed to get, I don't know, she's certainly floated with the press the idea that she's, at worst, Q curious. She's not a supporter. She tells people, I'm not a QAnon supporter. I'm not into that whole stuff. There are some things that they say that I think are, possibly things that need to be looked into, but I'm not a QAnon supporter. And it's a total lie. I mean, it's completely ridiculous to say something like that. I understand that that's the thing you need to say. That's one of the few places that she's felt any pressure whatsoever. So, I mean, maybe that's something to be mined. Maybe that's meaningful in some way that even she is not willing or hasn't been willing to this point to simply come out and say, yeah, I absolutely believe in the QAnon conspiracies. And I don't know whether it's strategic that she recognizes that even that wouldn't fly, or rather that it wouldn't fly even with her supporters, or that it would make her look too crazy even for what she's typically used to doing, or whether she considers the fact that she has occasionally said, I'm not 100% sure that this crazy Q thing is in fact real. It's hard to imagine what sorts of things she would say that about, but she has said it. So, well, you don't have to imagine it. You could look it up if you're willing to sit through all of this video. But she occasionally says, I'm not sure I buy that one. But on the other hand, Jewish space lasers, that she buys. So you kind of wonder about the value of the things that she's willing to distance herself from, and whether it means anything in particular, or it's just being done. She's not drawing a line about this is too far or that's too crazy, because the things that I've seen her reject are far less crazy than Jewish space lasers, which, by the way, I did see somebody crack this joke over the weekend, and I didn't save it because it's just not that important, but it was a good joke. They were saying, we're all struggling with, and maybe it just sounds that much dumber to say, yeah, Jewish space lasers. I mean, that is pretty stupid. But they were saying that the Death Star of David is hanging out there for use, and nobody's going with it. But maybe it just makes her seem too cute by half. Anyway, in case you were wondering about Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Q thing and how close to the whole conspiracy is she, another source of material that I find is very frequently validated in some important ways after he speculates, after he heads out on a limb and speculates a little bit, along with Seth Abramson is Scott Dworkin. No relation to Greg, as far as I know. But he, too, is a little out front in his speculation, and I don't feel super comfortable following all the time. But in this case, he has done some sorting through Marjorie Taylor Greene's extensive online video archives. I mean, she hasn't been shy about documenting her crazy on her YouTube channel, but she also hasn't been very smart about it. And I don't know how much she's aware is still out there. She's not been, careful about things, to be sure. But anyway, like I said, she's a prolific internet lunatic troll, and it was her major vocation in life to videotape herself saying how stupid she was with respect to being gullible about QAnon conspiracies and other conspiracies. And so he has a thread that's out there that I might as well share with you. I mean, there's no problem with what Scott is speculating, at least in the initial couple of tweets in the thread. I don't know what kind of conclusions he draws further down, but they're backed up with, here's the clip of Marjorie Taylor Greene's stupid internet spewing. So he's right about that. Here's the evidence. So he takes a couple of clips, and I don't know whether this is one long rant that he has taken the highlights of. It appears to be from one continuous rant in which she's wearing the same clothing and, sitting in the same position and everything. So anyway, he excerpts a couple of things, and you don't have to even necessarily listen to the video because he's excerpted the text here. So that way I can share it with you. But if you want to hear it in her annoying voice and look at her annoying Karen face with those, and I'm sorry again, Karen, that you got stuck with this. But she really pretty much embodies that concept, whatever, as ill-advised as the concept may be, she does embody it. So anyway, a couple of things she has to say about this. Q is anonymous, but he seems to be completely for the good. I mean, her syntax is also stupid as well, but he seems to be completely for the good. He seems to be totally on Trump's side, which actually means he's for the bad, but in your mind, such as it is, he seems to be for the good. There's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take this global, and she's talking about the global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles, and to take it out, but she calls it the global cable of Satan-worshipping pedophiles, which is an interesting and unique perspective on the pronunciation of the word, let's say. So, yeah, and then, of course, his commentary. Marjorie Taylor Greene, just a few years ago, expel immediately, right now, and pretty good reasoning for that, although not likely to be the basis of an expulsion. But she goes on, Q is a patriot. We know that for sure. But we do not know who Q is. Many of the things that he has given clues about and talked about on 4chan and other forums have really proven to be true. And, of course, they have really proven not to be true. And the fact that they're on 4chan should have been a hint to you that not only, one, that they weren't likely to come out to be true, but that they're really not meant for you, like for suburban white lunatics like you. 4chan is for, teenage and 20-something gamer trolls. And, I know your mind is in the same place as theirs, but you should have been able to recognize very early on that 4chan wasn't meant. It's not meant to be for people like you, but whatever. So you're crazy. A couple others here. Q signed off. This is this sort of dumb sort of signal searching that they engage in, right? Q signed off with 3 crosses in a row on November 6th, and I think she actually just means like plus signs, but to her, those are crosses. And this is not. I don't know when it was, which November 6th, but again, Scott Dworkin here says that this is from a couple of years ago. Q signed off with 3 crosses in a row on November 6th. 7 minutes later, Trump put 3 little crosses on his tweet. It was just more than a coincidence. It was really interesting. So again, Stupid sort of stuff. Relatively long thread of all of this, and you don't need to know much more than that she continues in this video to say dumb things like, well, Q is a good person, and he unearths really important evidence of Hillary Clinton's Satan worship. And like, okay, you can tell, one, how far off the deep end she's gone, and two, the idea that she's now shopping around, that I was never really a believer in Q. I do think the election was stolen, but I'm not a Q person, because everybody knows that Q people are crazy, and I want to avoid that stigma. I would rather create my own and show you I'm crazy in my own special way. But anyway, she knows that that's a bullet she needs to dodge, and I guess she's not going to be particularly effective at it. All right, let's see. Other things to share with you. We might as well take a quick look at this too. Lots of the press sort of, I guess, rediscovering, I suppose you could say, the memo from Trump's acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, with regard to the use of the D.C. National Guard during the insurrection. This was discovered and circulated quite some time ago, almost immediately after the insurrection. And so I feel like this is something we all knew about. We all heard about it within, on the day of the insurrection. We knew that the D.C. National Guard wasn't showing up, and we knew what the reasoning was. But for some reason, it's getting renewed interest. Fine by me, because terrific. Let's talk about it. It'll be evidence at the trial, I'm sure. The January 4th memo from the acting Secretary of Defense. And remember, not only is he an acting Secretary of Defense, but he was installed post-election, which all by itself is something of an anomaly, let's say. Very unusual for a president to name an acting, I guess you got to have one, but to install the number of people that he did at the Pentagon post-election, which I guess he might have been doing as a supporting act for his continuing lie that he intended to continue occupying the Oval Office, even though he had lost the election. But at any rate, the memo itself is what's of interest here, although how come I am unable to bring up the close-up of the picture. All right, well, I'll just scroll it up here. So this particular one, I think, widely circulated on Twitter. I guess it doesn't really matter who's tweeting this one around, but this is the memo here. Oh, maybe I should look at the original so that I can flip between the pages, because I think, no, it is all a one-pager. Here we are. Memorandum for the Secretary of the Army is subject of this January 4th memo. Employment guidance. Employment? It probably should have been deployment, but whatever. Maybe that's the way they use the terminology there in the Pentagon. Guidance for the District of Columbia National Guard. This memorandum responds to your January 4th, 2021 memorandum regarding the District of Columbia request for D.C. National Guard support in response to planned, and it is planned, demonstrations from January 5th through the 6th, 2021. In other words, the Secretary of the Army ahead of time says, I've heard, as we all have, that there's going to be maybe this crazy-ass rally going on from January 5th through the 6th, and I would like to know about how flexible we are in the use of the D.C. National Guard for crowd control, given how liberally they were, let's say, deployed during the summer in the middle of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And the answer is this. And the Republican cover for this, by the way, is, well, it all looked so bad when we did this to the Black Lives Matter marches that we want to avoid the same poor optics of deploying the D.C. National Guard now, which, what can you do? It probably works with some people. For most people, I think they say this is what the National Guard is supposed to be doing in situations like this. Okay, so here's his response. This is a memo in response to your memo to me asking what can we do given that you anticipate a significant event that might require the DC National Guard from January 5th through the 6th, which means we all understand ahead of time what the plans are here. You are authorized to approve the requested support subject to my guidance below and subject to consultation with the Attorney General as required by Executive Order 11485. I'm just, it's not 11 dash or anything. That's the number on it, but they probably refer to it that way. Read it, 11485. So what's the deal? You are authorized to approve the requested support, but with the following restrictions. Ready? Without my subsequent personal authorization, the new acting secretary says, the DC National Guard is not authorized the following. And then a bunch of bullet points, the first of which is to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, probably a bad idea, bayonets, batons, or ballistic projection equipment. Ballistic protection equipment. So, first, ballistic projection equipment is like T-shirt cannons. Although for the DC National Guard, we're probably talking about the so-called rubber bullets, which are actually like large bricks. But anyway, this is worse, actually. So you can't get any weapons or ammo. No bayonets, probably a good idea. No batons, seems like maybe batons would be okay. But you also can't have ballistic protection equipment such as helmets and body armor, even though you're going to be facing a crowd of insurrectionists wearing helmets and body armor, which is really amazing. And I still to this day don't understand why authorities allow people to assemble in large groups with weaponry and helmets and body armor. You're just asking for trouble. And of course, to say that you are not allowed to respond by wearing any of those things, even though you have been wearing them for every response to every other demonstration that's been going on here in D.C. and everywhere around the country. And that's been a huge part of the problem of the escalation of these tensions. But now we're going to de-escalate and get out of the way of the protesters. We're going to give them a break for once, because these are the same people protesting, right? No? Different group? Okay. Well, whatever. Probably doesn't matter. Other things not authorized unless you get personal authorization from Christopher Miller to interact physically with protesters except when necessary in self-defense or defense of others, consistent with the DC National Guard rules for the use of force. Not authorized to employ any riot control agents, because why would you need them? What do we do about that? There's no riots happening here, right? No, so can't have any of those. You can't share equipment with law enforcement agencies, which is, of course, everything they've been doing for decades now, and it's been kind of a problem. You are not authorized to use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets. Apparently that's got its own acronym now, ISR, or own abbreviation anyway. Not allowed to use ISR assets or to conduct ISR to incident awareness and assessment activities. Not allowed to employ helicopters or any other air assets. Can't conduct searches, seizures, arrests, or other similar direct law enforcement activity. And, of course, no seeking of support from any non-DC National Guard units. At all times, the DC National Guard will remain under the operational and administrative command and control of the Commanding General of the DC National Guard, who reports to the Secretary of Defense, that's me, through the Secretary of the Army, that's you. You may employ the DC National Guard Quick Reaction Force, and that's a QRF, in case you didn't know. It's actually in here. Only as a last resort and in response to a request from an appropriate civil authority. If the QRF is employed, the DC National Guard personnel will be clearly marked and or distinguished from civilian law enforcement personnel, and you will notify me immediately upon your authorization. And signed here, Christopher Miller, and his handwriting's no great shakes, but just thought I'd point that out. Anyway, so basically it's everything you thought, everything you were told. The acting Secretary of Defense told the DC National Guard authorities, and I guess now, again, getting widespread attention as the trial approaches, and I think that's quite correct. Let's see. Other items of interest here. There are so many. Let's see. Oh, and the along the lines of COVID failures that some people, anyway, are now attempting to lay at the feet of Joe Biden. Here's one that I think properly, obviously, laid at the feet of Donald Trump. Not that he'd ever accept it, but whatever. Biden's the president now, and so people are motivated to do this differently. A Politico piece, "It's a mess," says the headline. Biden's first 10 days dominated by vaccine mysteries. But yes, genuinely, there are actual voting people, responsible adults and everything, allowed to take care of kids and the whole works, out there saying, yeah, Joe Biden, where's all these vaccines? Biden's team is still trying to locate upwards of 20 million vaccine doses that have been sent to states, a mystery that has hampered plans to speed up the national vaccination effort. Again, in Politico, Tyler Pager, Adam Cankren, do I have that name right? And Joanne Kennan are the names on this piece here. Joe Biden promised he'd bring in a competent, tested team to run the pandemic response, set ambitious vaccination targets, and impose strict public health guidelines. His team arrived at the White House with a 200-page response plan ready to roll out, but instead they have spent much of the last week trying to wrap their hands around the mushrooming crisis, a process officials acknowledge has been humbling and triggered a concerted effort to temper expectations about how quickly they might get the nation back to normal. After a week on the job, Biden's team is still trying to locate upwards of 20 million vaccine doses that have been sent to the states, a mystery that has hampered plans to speed up the national vaccination effort. They're searching for new ways to boost production of a vaccine stockpile that they've discovered is mostly empty. And they're nervously eyeing a series of new COVID-19 strains that threaten to derail the response. If it's the Mike Tyson quote, is what someone offers here. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, I thought it was in the face, but I'm not sure. Anyway, mouth's on the face, so I think you can let it slide. This, according to one person with knowledge of the vaccine effort, who's not authorized to discuss the work, and you can go punch them in the mouth for having done so, I guess. They are planning. They are competent. It's just the weight of everything when you sit down in that chair. It's heavy. Biden officials leading the coronavirus response launched a series of regular briefings this week to keep the public informed on the state of the pandemic and government efforts to contain it and rush vaccines out to as many Americans as possible. But the briefings were short on details, because we don't have them yet, I guess. And behind the scenes, officials say the team was still struggling to get a handle on basic information, liaise with the career government workers who've been running the response, and build out a long-term strategy for bringing and then keeping the virus under control. One of the virtues of a well-run transition is that by the time you take the reins, you've developed some rapport and trust with the career people you're working with. The person familiar with the administration's work said, the courtship has been unnaturally short. The person added, and of course that's Trump's doing and his fault, and he ought to be held accountable for it. And I guess if he wants to derail the trial and talk about anything that comes to mind, I don't know, maybe the door ought to be open to prosecuting him for any number of things, but I don't think they'll go there. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to send some more articles of impeachment, by the way. Anyway, nobody had a complete picture, said Julie Morita, a member of the Biden transition team and executive vice president at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The plans that were being made with the assumption that more information would be available and be revealed once they got into the White House. It's a steep challenge that Biden officials said they'd been anticipating for weeks amid a rocky transition period that left them scrambling to piece together vaccine distribution plans and coordinate with state health officials. Yet in the days since taking over, the COVID response team has confronted a situation that officials described as far worse than expected, and that has prompted public assessments so dour they surprised some who had worked on the administration's former transition team. On Tuesday, Biden warned that the vaccine program is in worse shape than we anticipated or expected, echoing complaints from his chief of staff, Ron Klain, that a plan didn't really exist. Not before they came in. Anyway, Biden's COVID response team has since made a concerted effort not to heap blame on the Trump administration, one official said, even as their vague allusions to a worse-than-expected situation have prompted speculation about what specific problems they've encountered. But people with knowledge of the response detailed fresh concerns that are largely centered on the federal government's vaccine supply. Biden's team is still trying to get a firm grasp of the whereabouts of more than 20 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine that the federal government bought and distributed to states, but has yet to record as being administered to patients. So, I guess eventually we find out something about what happened to these vaccines, but not just yet. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's continue with this because I think this is important, and I'm sacrificing a couple of other good stories, at least for the moment, but we still have the whole week ahead of us. We'll be flooded later on and miss a bunch of these anyway, but I'm interested in finding out what the hell is going on with these things. I mean, we're all interested in, and there's no answer yet about what happened to the actual vaccines, but filling in the blanks as to, well, what exactly are we talking about here? Was there just no record keeping whatsoever by the Trump administration? Or is it that every time one of these freezers breaks somewhere and the very clever clinicians in charge find ways to get all those vaccine doses into arms, despite the fact that the preservation, the freezers and other preservation equipment have failed them? I mean, we're all glad for those stories, but I guess at some point they do write down and tell somebody, well, I did take the names, I guess. I don't know whether they bother taking names. But anyway, I can report that I gave out this many doses. That much they should be able to figure out. I don't think that's going to equal 20 million, right? Anyway, let's read on here. Only a small percentage of those unaccounted for doses, roughly 2 million, officials said, 2 out of the 20, right, is due to lags in data reporting. Okay. That's according, I guess they say the Biden team believes that to be the case. That would mean the rest of the crucial supply is boxed away in warehouses, sitting idle in freezers, I hope, or floating elsewhere in the complex distribution pipeline that runs from the administration to individual states. That's a dilemma that predated the Biden team's arrival, with Biden himself hammering the vaccine rollout's first weeks under the Trump administration as a dismal failure. Yet the response team underestimated at the outset how difficult it would be to fix. The Biden transition had only received high-level briefings on the distribution effort in the run-up to the inauguration on January 20th, a transition official said, and was largely kept out of the detailed discussions about the on-the-ground operation. The team didn't get granular access to Tiberius, the central government system used for tracking vaccine distribution, until the transition's final days. It was not until after Biden was sworn in that the COVID response team discovered the system was blinded to much of the route that vaccines traveled from the government's distribution hubs to people's arms. Instead, once the vaccine shipments are delivered to the states, responsibility for tracking them has been left up to the states and their individual public health systems, which really still ought to largely be able to track these things, but who knows. The administration then only gets an update once the doses are actually administered and an official record is submitted. I think they were really caught off guard by that, said one advisor. It's a mess. And it is pretty interesting that at the same time that the Trump administration was saying, well, states will be responsible for the distribution and administration of these vaccines and reporting what happens to them, reporting the disposition back to the federal government. But not only will they be responsible for it, we are not going to help them pay for any of the injecting that needs to be done or any of the reporting that needs to be done. And lo and behold, some portion of that, maybe both parts of that, weren't done. How weird is that? We were just talking about that. All right. Top Biden officials have stressed that the missing doses are spread out across the states, which remain largely responsible for getting them to the health providers charged with vaccinating the tens of millions of people waiting in line for shots. But the COVID team has since had to spend hours on the phone with various state officials trying to manually track down the unused doses, a time-consuming task that sapped resources and has yet to give officials a full picture of where exactly supplies are going. They've also sought to persuade health providers to stop holding doses in reserve, a practice born out of concerns people wouldn't be able to get the second shot of their 2-dose regimen, but one that's no longer necessary and has only contributed to the confusion, according to 2 people with knowledge of the discussions. On a call with White House officials on Tuesday, Arkansas Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson vented that some states are bearing the brunt of the blame for uneven rollout because of those reserves, a nuance not reflected in the federal numbers, according to notes of the call obtained by Politico. The complaint prompted a pledge from the CDC and Rochelle Walensky there to issue clearer guidance for how states should manage their allocated vaccines. Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker later blamed a Trump administration program that designated pharmacies to distribute vaccines to long-term care facilities for bringing our numbers way down because of how slow it has been to get shots in arms. The White House has since given states permission to seize unused doses from the pharmacy program and reallocate them elsewhere. There is no doubt they are doing a better job. George Helmy, the chief of staff for New Jersey Democratic Governor Phil Murphy, said about the Biden administration, "We have a true partner who is being transparent and collaborative." As they grapple with the immediate distribution issues, federal officials have also raced to build out detailed plans for eventually distributing the shots to broader populations beyond healthcare workers and older Americans, a project that people familiar with the effort say the Trump administration never even started on. And though the Biden team had planned to boost the pace of vaccine manufacturing over time, some Biden officials said they were shocked to learn soon after Inauguration Day that there was little in the federal vaccine reserve and that the companies producing the shots were nowhere near capable of churning out as many doses as the Trump administration had projected in the preceding months. The Biden administration has since warned that supplies will remain limited until the summer, raising the possibility of ongoing shortages even as the nation's daily vaccination rate picks up. The White House cheered promising data on a new single-dose vaccine from Johnson & Johnson on Friday, but production obstacles have dampened expectations for its immediate impact, with one federal official likening the anticipated early flow of shots to a trickle. That has turned the COVID team's first days into something closer of a triage operation than the more orderly rollout that the administration had hoped for, especially as much of the federal health department operates on a skeleton staff made up of career officials and a handful of early political appointees. And though the Biden administration is still pressing ahead with building mass vaccination sites and long-planned preparations for the long-term response effort, officials said the time lost navigating this early set of difficulties has set back a response already likely to consume much of Biden's first year in office. This isn't over anytime soon, said Craig, I don't know how he pronounces his last name, Fugate, perhaps, F-U-G-A-T-E, a former Obama administration FEMA administrator, who I guess we should know about, who worked on the transition. There may not be a bright red line where when we cross that line, we're done, we're finished, and everything's going to be great. Okay? So there may not even be that line. And who knows how he pronounces his name as well. Another lingering problem we have. So I guess that's it. I just kind of wanted to update you on what sorts of problems they're facing beyond, hey, they don't know where the 20 million shots are. And you get as much detail of exactly what are they facing as you can. It's still troublesome and puzzling how this stuff can't be tracked down. But I guess, it stems. Other countries have done so much better with their rollout. Part of that is Trump, but part of it is, of course, also a lot of those countries have national health systems, and the vaccines don't have to leave national government custody in order to get into arms. So I assume it's a lot easier to track those things than by handing this to, 18 different sovereign authorities on its way into people's arms. But still, you'd think, all right, well, we sent, 50,000 doses to Oklahoma. Get me Oklahoma on the phone. And, it says it went to this address. Call this office. Hey, did you get those vaccines? Yes, but we sent those out a long time ago. Where did they go? Pull up your list. Give that to me. Let's call those people. Yeah, I'm sure that's a lot of work, but it's just one of those things that's, I'm sure, baffling everybody. I don't understand. Eventually you're going to call somebody who says, I didn't get those, or I don't know what you're talking about, or we gave those out a long time ago, or whatever, or we decided we didn't need them, or you decided we didn't need them and took them back and sent them to Alabama. We did? Ugh, damn it. But at least I'd like to hear some reports about where are they hitting those walls and what's happening. And, eventually, probably we could just skip to the end. Jared Kushner stole them and sent them to Russia. Okay. Well, we should look into that. That sort of thing. Anyway, let's see. On to other subjects. And there are some real interesting ones out there. Let's see. First of all, this one I think we'll have to assign for outside reading, although I might want to read this one today. I tried to do it over the weekend, just too much to go on. Judy Vincent shared this very interesting looking approach to understanding the ongoing trolling influence of the Trump world from Politico magazine, called The Anti-Pope of Mar-A-Lago: What a Medieval Religious Schism Can Teach Us About Donald Trump's Unprecedented and Radically Antagonistic Approach to the Ex-Presidency. Should be very interesting, but it is, of course, listed as something of a 20-plus minute read, and I very much would like to read it. Maybe it's something that we could share in a longer format on a day when we've got more room, not at the end in the last segment of the show, but I want to recommend it to you. It looks like it might be interesting to get a look ahead at what might be in the offing, although... I'm mostly interested in reading it to see whether it presents any sort of a cohesive plan for handling or for dealing with or for utilizing the ex-presidency by Trump, and by how much do I think he would fall short of such a plan, and if it existed, because he's an extraordinarily lazy person and very ineffective at doing anything besides, I guess, playing golf, although he's also ineffective at doing that because he cheats. So, okay. But I want to put that one out there. I thought a good suggestion. Let me turn to a different subject here. Oh, I should hit one more coronavirus piece of news. Just for the record, this is out there. The Hill reporting this one. I don't know who originally picked this one up, but maybe the article will tell us. CNN. All right, well, their headline: Democratic lawmaker vaccinated for COVID-19 tests positive. Jordan Williams wrote this piece up, and upon reflection, it's not as depressing as it sounds. I don't think that the requisite amount of time had passed for the full immunity effect, and again, remember, it's only a 95% immunity effect anyway, to settle in for our Democratic lawmaker in question here. It's Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, by the way, tested positive for COVID-19 on Friday afternoon after a member of his staff tested positive for the virus. And apparently Lynch had gotten his second dose and tested negative before attending the Biden inauguration on January 20th. But on further examination, I guess he got it just to, immediately, perhaps before the inauguration. And I think you still need to wait a good 2 weeks past your second dose, 2 to 3 weeks, before they say you have, you statistically will enjoy that 95% protection. Entirely possible, of course, given how widespread the virus is and how many millions of people in the United States have got it. Eventually, we're going to have some not insignificant number of cases of people who have gotten both shots and waited the requisite amount of time, but still become infected just because, if you infect 100 million people, there's going to be that 5% number that it sneaks through with them is still going to be a relatively high number. The hope is, of course, that the disease is that much less severe and the threat of serious illness or even death is minimized, de minimis, we could say, just to use a little bit more Latin today, and would largely not be an issue. Which reminds me also that I saw over the weekend, and I think I did put these tweets away, that, although I don't see them immediately, that as I guess expected, I know we've speculated on it a little bit on the show before, that with continued masking and social distancing, the normal regular flu season appears to have been squashed flat, which is great news and really something we ought to, Greg will probably tell you, we ought to have been doing this for a long time to keep the flu under control during the winter months. But yes, by comparison to prior flu seasons, there's virtually no influenza in circulation among the general population. And then, of course, another chart that looked at, I think it was pediatric deaths from flu, which we are reminded each year is actually a fairly serious problem. One wonders as to why so many people kept insisting that COVID was just the flu, when the flu absolutely is a major problem for pediatric patients, but didn't appear initially to be that much of a problem for pediatric patients with COVID. And yet it was the flu, and yet it was affecting people in opposite ways for the flu, and yet was more deadly than the flu. But that's just, I guess, goes to the incoherence of their position. But pediatric deaths from influenza this year, too, virtually non-existent, and that's a great thing. And I don't know. In years past, we certainly got the advice that we should all be, distancing, washing our hands, probably even wearing masks during flu season. But everybody thought that was crazy. Now that we're kind of used to masking, generally speaking, except for the anti-maskers out there, it may be the case that people susceptible to the flu will feel a lot less ridiculous wearing masks in the years to come during flu season. Might be a nice long-term benefit to that. It would be great to be able to tamp down on flu, lost productivity from the flu, and of course, deaths at any age group from influenza as well. All right, let's see. Other things to share. Totally different story, but another one that seems important. So let's throw it in the last couple of minutes here from the AP. Mary Claire Dale reporting this one for AP. Russian hack brings changes, uncertainty to U.S. court system. This, I think, to this point, at least for me, unanticipated fallout from the big Russian hacking story that we heard about some time ago, and then kind of dropped in all the excitement about, nearly losing control of our government, et cetera, et cetera. But all right, Dateline here is Philadelphia for this. Trial lawyer Robert Fisher is handling one of America's most prominent counterintelligence cases, defending an MIT scientist charged with secretly helping China. But how he'll handle the logistics of the case could feel old school. Under new court rules, he'll have to print out any highly sensitive documents and hand deliver them to the courthouse, the way Congress works. Until recently, even the most secretive material about wiretaps, witnesses, and national security concerns could be filed electronically. But that changed after the massive Russian hacking campaign that breached the U.S. court system's electronic case files and those of scores of other federal agencies and private companies. I don't think I had heard about it getting into the courts systems, but you'll quickly see what kind of a problem this could pose. The new rules for filing sensitive documents are one of the clearest ways the hack has affected the court system, but the full impact remains unknown. Hackers probably gained access to the vast trove of confidential information hidden in sealed documents, including trade secrets, even in, business cases, espionage targets, though, in national security cases, whistleblower reports, and arrest warrants. It could take years to learn what information was obtained and what hackers are doing with it. It's also not clear that the intrusion has been stopped, prompting the rules on paper filings. Those documents are now uploaded to a standalone computer at the courthouse, one not connected to the network or the internet. That means lawyers cannot access the documents from outside the courthouse, which in pandemic times is kind of a tough thing. Fisher is defending Gang Chen, a nanotechnology researcher fighting against charges that he defrauded the U.S. It would be cumbersome if we do have to start filing pleadings during the litigation on paper. That's going to be more difficult, Fisher said, particularly during COVID. Most of us are working from home. The Russian intrusion through the SolarWinds software has President Joe Biden in an early tussle with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, and U.S. senators are worried about the grave risk to U.S. intelligence. The Administrative Office of U.S. Courts confirmed the court system breach on January 6th. What do you know? Joining a victims list that included the State Department, the National Institutes of Health, tech companies, and an unknown number of Fortune 500 companies. No wonder we weren't able to pay attention to it. It happened on January 6th. U.S. officials have linked the effort, which went on for much of 2020, to elite Russian hackers. I don't think we know what motivated the Russians in this case to target the court system, whether it was a target of opportunity enabled by the SolarWinds breach or whether it was a priority, said Ben Buchanan, who teaches cyber espionage at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. I mean, they may actually be teaching it's not counter cyber espionage, but actual cyber espionage if you're at the School of Foreign Service. Okay. Interesting. Though the entry point in the SolarWinds network software has been plugged, it's really hard to kick the Russians out once they're in, he said. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. What motivated them? Was it a target of opportunity or were they aiming for it? And I would say it's a pretty good bet that they might have been aiming for it, especially if you can crack into sealed and redacted documents in the national security cases and find out when names are removed from court filings so that we don't, accidentally reveal sources and methods of our espionage or counter-espionage operations. If the Russians had access to that, why, that would be really good for them and really bad for us. Federal court operations are largely decentralized. Each of the 13 circuits adopts its own rules and security measures. Some courts encrypt documents filed under seal, but others do not, according to court employees who spoke with the Associated Press on condition of anonymity, of course, because, well, the usual reasons. Either way, anyone sophisticated enough to launch the SolarWinds attack can probably decrypt data, perhaps by stealing an authorized user's credentials, experts said. Targets could include not just court staff, but also soft targets such as law firms that upload files to the case management system, known as CMECF. Criminal, civil, and bankruptcy filings also are believed to have been compromised, but not the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court system. Whew, okay, at least we have that, at least not to our knowledge anyway, which handles national security surveillance warrants, according to the court employees. Senators are pressing court officials and the Justice Department for clear assessment of the damage to the legal system. I fear we do not know how Russia could take advantage of the access and information it may have obtained, and we likely won't know until it's far too late. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut told AP in a statement, "The cleanup of this breach will be extraordinarily difficult, but we cannot cut corners and just hope that the Russians left." No, that would be unwise. Some worry that the new rules will reduce public access to court proceedings. It will. But they could also make judges rethink whether a seal or paper filing is really necessary. Court transparency advocates feel the judges have been on a sealing binge in recent years, keeping the public in the dark about important evidence and product liability, public corruption, and other cases. But others say the need for privacy is real, especially when it comes to corporate fights over patent secrets or other intellectual property or whistleblower complaints, which remain secret while the government investigates. They fear that companies could be shaken down or see their stock price plummet if the information is exposed. There's an underlying concern about what was breached. Our cases do ultimately come out from under seal, but the risk is a compromise in the interim of a federal investigation or our clients, said lawyer Erica Blackman Hitchings of the Whistleblower Law Collaborative in Boston. Frank Montoya Jr., a retired FBI agent and counterterrorism expert, believes Russian officials will exploit whatever they can as they sift through the data, just as they did in 2016 when they leaked stolen Democratic National Committee emails during the U.S. presidential election. It could take years or decades to gauge their intent. We tend to still look at this stuff as spy versus spy, but the reality is it's not just about a specific targeted interest. It's about exploiting everything to make money, to benefit the state, to undermine the U.S., he said. And here I guess I would just add my own commentary in saying, yeah, well, given the weird dovetailing in the gray areas between what passes for the Russian national government and organized crime efforts, to the extent that organized crime figures are able to monetize stolen data, and it seems to be a major undertaking in organized crime these days, and fund operations which are largely carried out in many cases in support of what purports to be the Russian national government, that's just good news for the Russian government, things that they don't have to pay for, or funds that can be tapped for kickbacks and kicks up to Putin and others of the oligarchs, etc., etc. Not a good situation. But Georgetown's Buchanan, let's finish up here, doesn't see the Russian government selling trade secrets even for something as valuable as, say, the COVID-19 vaccine or a blockbuster drug. He believes it's all about statecraft and espionage. I think it could be wider than that. Retired U.S. Circuit Judge Thomas Vanaski, who led the U.S. Judicial Conference's Information Technology Committee about 12 years ago, when everything was different, worries about the government's duty to people who seek justice from the courts. We have assured counsel that you can file on our system electronically confidential material that will be sealed and not subject to being hacked, he said. And here we are, hacked. Yeah, so a bad result, certainly. And even if the most sensitive national security information is on a different system that we allege, anyway, hasn't been hacked. And I don't know whether if it was hacked, you would say so anyway. But in the meantime, lots of sensitive information that, right, well, where there's this weird dovetailing between organized crime elements and a national government, if the national government comes to be in possession of information that ordinarily wouldn't be of very much interest to them about, say, private individuals involved in divorce cases or, criminal cases, say, involving stuff like stalking and things where people are personally put in danger. Ordinarily, you wouldn't imagine that the Russian government would have very much interest in that. And they might not, unless they were targets for some other reason, national security figures or governmental figures or perhaps even important corporate figures. Then you could maybe see direct government interest in it. But if they don't have it, they can shunt that over to the organized crime side and say, do you think you can monetize this? And yeah, could organized crime on the dark web, whatever the hell that is, find a way to monetize information about witnesses in the witness protection program? Say they're hiding from American mafia figures or even hiding from Russian mafia figures, right? Now we know where they are, and now we can figure that out. Or you have information about women who've been victimized by their ex-husbands or former boyfriends or whatever about whom, or who are now under restraining orders to stay away from them, and they've moved and are hiding from people. Could that information be sold to the very people we're trying to keep away from them? Sure, of course it could. What interest is it in the Russian government if that happens? Well, it helps fund some of their operations. I mean, overseas assassinations not always carried out necessarily by Russian state espionage actors, sometimes probably by organized crime figures instead. And if they're all just taking kickbacks from organized crimes operations for the privilege of letting them continue to operate, well, so much the better. The kickbacks are bigger, and even if it doesn't go into government coffers, Putin's probably fine with it going into his coffers. It's a pretty dangerous situation, to be sure. So I wanted to update you on it, bring it to your attention. We'll be back tomorrow, speaking to Joan McCarter, of course, and catching up on more of these stories that I may have missed so far. But Justice will be here to update you on them first.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, Justice Putnam, of course, up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Lots on the table, of course. GOP lawmakers in state houses across the country seeking tougher voting rules after the record turnout in the general election. In other words, trying to find new ways to cheat in elections and keep themselves in power. Interesting. That's up next.